Hello, leaders, and welcome to Leadership Excellence. My name is Danny Langloss, and today I'm joined by Richard Schell. He is the chair of legal studies and business ethics and the senior faculty member at Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. His books on negotiation, influence, and success have sold over 500,000 copies. His new book, and the focus of this conversation, The Conscious Code, Lead with Your Values, Advance Your Career, is scheduled to be released the week of June 8th, 2021, which will also be when this podcast is dropping. Richard's a skilled communicator across many diverse audiences. His students have included everyone from Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, Fortune 500 CEOs, to FBI hostage negotiators, Navy SEALs, United Nations peacekeepers. In addition, he's worked extensively with public school teachers, labor unions, nurses, hospital administrators to help them become more effective professionals. Richard, it is such an honor to have you here. Welcome to the Leadership Excellence Podcast.
Thank you, Danny. I really appreciate you having me.
So, Richard, Wharton School, that is a very, very prestigious school at the University of Pennsylvania. Can you talk to us a little about your career and background?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I'm very fortunate to be on the faculty at Wharton. It's probably the business university, if you had to distinguish it from, a lot of other business schools. It's huge. It's got 250 standing faculty. It's got thousands of students, undergraduate, MBA, PhD, executives. And I actually have a very non-traditional journey. I joined the faculty. I was a lawyer. I joined the faculty when I was 37 years old. The legal studies department is actually the brainchild of Joseph Wharton. When he started the school, he had 3 required courses: finance, accounting, and law. And he thought that law was an essential for business leaders to have a grasp of. And so our department has grown with the school since then. We now have 25 faculty, and we teach both law and ethics, and I teach both as well. The book, The Conscience Code, comes out of a course I teach for MBAs. It's a required course called Responsibility. So it really combines law, ethics, and character, and it's very much a part of the leadership curriculum.
Wow. And I've had a chance, I haven't been able to read the entire book. Richard and his team were generous enough to send me a copy of it for those on YouTube checking it out. It's amazing. The depth here, the takeaways, absolutely phenomenal. We'll probably get into it a little later, but Dixon is actually in the book where I'm from, where I'm the city manager at, and a crisis and tragedy that I was asked to help lead the way through. But when we talk about the book, the Conscious Code, what was your inspiration for that?
Sure. It came out of this responsibility course. I was standing in front of MBA students year after year teaching this basic course on responsible leadership. And I began hearing the stories that they were telling of their jobs after college, but before they came to grad school. And many of them had a quality to them that they faced a very strong ethical challenge. They were sexually harassed, or they were asked to be complicit in a startup in terms of faking sales or a website. They were in consulting or finance, and their bosses were putting pressure on them to put data into reports that wasn't completely baked. And I began realizing that they really hadn't been prepared to face these kinds of conflicts. And there were a number of barriers that I realized I could help them try to overcome, because they were all good people, but they were coming to the program with deep regrets that they could have done better. They were a little conflicted and confused about what had happened to them. And so all of my books have really been about how to help people be more effective professionals. And so I sort of felt the calling to try to write something that would help people of conscience, good people, stand up and do the right thing when the pressure is on to look the other way or to hope it will go away. It's not all about whistleblowing. The usual sort of take on this sort of situation is it's either or, it's conscience or career. It's either you blow the whistle and you put everything at risk, or you just put your head down and just keep going. And I think there's a big space in between. First of all, I like to refer to people as people of conscience rather than whistleblowers, because I think people of conscience just try to do the right thing. But there are many effective ways that don't involve whistleblowing that will help you correct things and get things right. It may be that you are called to blow the whistle at the end of the day if there's no other solution, but there's a lot of other steps before that. And it really, to try to provide them with practical tools to meet these conflicts that they were facing at work.
And I think that's an excellent distinction. It's not about a major situation that requires a whistleblower and legal protections. These are practical day-to-day things. When I think about, our city clerk, Kathy Swanson, and the decision she had to make when she discovered the embezzlement of Rita Crunwell, like that's a major, major thing. And it took her a few days, and we'll dive into that later. But even on those big things that can become difficult, especially when you look at, like, most of the time people have difficulty with just simple conversations that might result in conflict, or they perceive them as being difficult. Even as something as simple as a supervisor needing to coach and mentor somebody on their team, they're worried about upsetting them. There's this fear of man and the social pressures. So the fact that you've done this in a way that helps us day to day, right, make those choices, decisions based on our values, align with that, but also for bigger, more expansive things, I think that's really impressive.
Well, I think the two things are connected because I think the little decisions we make every day are the foundation for the confidence we have when bigger problems come along. And so if you make it a habit to express yourself when someone tells a joke that's insulting and it's sexist or is demeaning to somebody, and rather than just sort of shrug and go along with the group that's empowering that person, you make it a habit to say, I'm not comfortable with that. And maybe it's just me, but I'd appreciate it if we didn't tell that kind of joke at the team meeting. That you can do it respectfully. And actually what's really mostly going on when you acquire the habit of speaking up when you have a value that you think is at risk, about 3/4 of the people that you're around are having exactly the same thought you did, but none of them had the impulse to speak up. And as soon as you speak up and take the lead, then everybody else take a huge sigh of relief and they go, wow, here's somebody who said exactly what I was thinking. And then you get these nods of agreement. And now the whole team is going to be a value-based team because they know they have the permission to speak what their feelings are about these sensitive matters. And they get the courage to run the work in the right direction, as opposed to letting someone dominate who is got a big ego, or is a bully, or is someone who's got sort of a bent sense of humor about whatever it is, and or likes to cut corners, or tends to be slightly dishonest, not in an embezzlement way. What happened in Nixon, I think, was you had a psychopath, as a city controller, but the little things then give you the foundation for having the confidence to speak when something like an embezzlement does come up, and then you know exactly what you have to do. You know what your duty is, it's clear, and then you have some tools to take effective action.
Wow. So powerful. And by us acting, what I took from that is by us acting on these values with character and integrity, and you're going to take a deeper dive, I don't want to talk too much. It creates our own leadership value. It forms
Exactly.
the trust and respect of others and builds those relationships. You're leading by example. That's what gives you the influence. And it ends up becoming contagious and creating a culture, a very healthy culture.
Exactly.
So Richard, how do you want to kind of go through and break down the framework?
Well, I mean, I tried to make this actionable. And so the book has 10 chapters, and each one is a rule of the conscience code. But I think a simpler way to think about it is just 4 steps. And I've got it conceptualized with something I call the OODA Loop, OODA, and then loop, like a loop in a circle. Okay. And the OODA Loop is actually the strategies that fighter pilots follow when they're in a dogfight with another fighter pilot and they have an action in the air. And in the pilot combat sense, it stands for, the first O is observe, The second is orient. The third is decide. And the fourth is act. And then as soon as you act, of course, your opponent acts, and then you have to observe and orient and decide and act again. So the loop is that you're constantly adjusting to what your counterpart does. But in my framework, I changed the second O. So it's observe. So you're in the office, you're in a meeting, and someone puts up a data slide, and someone asks a question, and they hesitate and say, well, that's actually not from a real study, but we just want to make sure that we have something to show the client. Well, now if you're observing, you know that that's unethical. So that's the first step. You have to like face up to it. That's just not right. Then the second is own. Instead of orient, which is the combat one, it's own. And I think ownership is one of the most difficult parts of this, because when you step from just observing to owning, that means you're going to take responsibility. That means it's up to you to do something. You're not going to assume that it's above your pay grade, or that someone else will do it, or that it's not your job, or you're just going to say, this is a value conflict. I'm a person of conscience. I own this problem. Now, that doesn't mean you haven't told yourself what you're going to do yet. Just, I own this problem. I'm going to bring it to my heart. Then the third thing is, now you own it, decide. What are my options here? Should I speak up now? Should I wait till the meeting's over and take him aside and have a conversation? Maybe I need to call my mentor or get some advice from someone that I've observed this. What would be the most effective way to take action that would be the least disruptive and the most acceptable? So then you go through the decision process. And then the final step is you take some action. So maybe it's as simple as just speaking up at the meeting, but maybe it's you step back to your office and you send an email to your mentor saying, can I have a brief word this afternoon? I've got something important to talk to you about. So then when you take the action, then you're back in the loop. So now you're going to get new information, get new advice, new understanding, and now you make an adjustment to your decision and go back and observe what happens when you take action, own what that next step is, decide, and act again. So each of the 10 rules of the Conscience Code actually is caught up in these 4 steps of the OODA Loop. And so I think that's really a pretty useful and simple way to remember how you want to run this. It's a conflict problem. And so you need to manage the conflict in a way that is consistent with your conscience.
Wow. I love how you've broken that down in the simpler format there. And you talk about, the set of 10 rules, then follow and operate within it. So we observe, most of us know when we observe something that this isn't right, whether it be an inappropriate sexual joke, whether somebody's manipulating data, whether somebody in a more extreme thing is taking money, maybe somebody's bullying somebody, whatever the case may be, or maybe they're violating some policy that is a risk or a liability of the corporation. But under the ownership, the take responsibility, it's up to you. What are some of the rules that apply for that? Or what are some of the things that you're trying to drive home so we can handle this conflict problem successfully?
Sure. Sharon Watkins, she was the person who was responsible for bringing the Enron scandal to light. She was an internal auditor there. And she made a comment that I think is really powerful in the ownership stage of this process. She said, all that's required for a corporation to go in the wrong direction, or for an office to go off the rails, is pressure, opportunity, and a rationalization. And so at the ownership stage, what you're going to experience is pressure not to do something. And the pressure you may experience it as peer pressure. Everybody does this. We should just let it pass. Or pressure from a boss. We don't want this trouble, so just, lie low. It could be pressure from a goal that everybody's trying to achieve, and you're right at the end of the quarter, and this little report is going to get you to the sales level that you need to be, even if it's fake sales. You'll all get your bonus. Or it could be your role you're kind of junior in the organization, and so it's inappropriate, you think, to speak up. So there's this pressure, and I think pressure is what we experience when we know what the right thing to do is, but we're unwilling to own it. So there's the first piece. Then opportunity, which is that someone has gotten a little wrinkle in time here, and they're able to commit some wrong, and they think they might get away with it. And so now they're taking the wrong step, and now you've got to figure out where you stand with it. And then the third thing is something we do every day, whether we're dieting or trying to exercise or trying to remember to tell the truth: rationalization. And our minds, Benjamin Franklin, who founded the University of Pennsylvania, and is one of my heroes, said, it's so wonderful that humans are rational creatures because we can make up a reason to do almost anything we want.
Yes.
And when it comes to ethical things, it's so easy to give way to a rationalization like just this once, or everybody does it, or nobody will notice, or all the hundreds of things that our minds will come up with to disengage us. And so one of the things that's really important in this ownership stage is recognize a rationalization for what it is. And instead of letting it beguile you, step up with your values and say, no, everybody doesn't do it. I don't do it. And as a person of conscience, I don't have exceptions to my principles. I have discussions about them. Or just this once is what the frog in the pot likes to tell itself. I'm just going to get in this nice pot, and it won't cause me any harm. And then the heat gets higher and higher, and pretty soon, it's boiled and it can't get out. So slippery slopes are like that. And there's no such thing as just this once, any more than there's just one bite of ice cream or one Frito or one little fib. So you've got the rationalization, and you have to have the tools to kind of counter the rationalizations. And I think everybody has their own favorite list of things that they do to remind themselves. But examples are, well, what would grandma think if she could see me doing this? Or what would it look like if it were on the front page of a newspaper or a website that everybody that I know and love reads? And I really like this phrase, person of conscience, because I think most people are basically good people, but they forget their values and in the rush or the pressure. And I think if you think of yourself as not just a leader, not just a financial advisor, not just a consultant, but you're a person of conscience who is a leader, a person of conscience who is a financial advisor, that keeps your values focused and front and center. So then when these rationalizations come along, you recognize them for what they are, and then you develop habits. Virtue is a habit, the same way that exercise is a habit. And the better and more often you practice it, the stronger and more likely you are to be able to behave a way that you're proud of instead of regretting. So I think the second step, this ownership step, if you're aware of what's going on in there, and you become sort of sensitive and emotionally intelligent about your own feelings. And I would say one more thing. I think one of the most powerful things I learned in writing the book was something I call the power of two.
Yeah.
And the power of two is never take these on alone. If you have any chance to consult with someone that you trust or that you love or that loves you, or you consider a trusted advisor or a friend of virtue, someone who wants the best for you, don't go alone. Don't get lost inside your own conflict, and bring someone else in. And that will often give you the confidence to overcome the rationalization.
Yeah, I found that really interesting when I read the chapter on the power of two, and this whole idea of finding an ally, right? The not go this alone, because there were some other things within there, especially when you're, approaching the person that have the issues, to make sure you have clarity on what it is the issue is, to make sure we're seeing it right, formulating, what that is. And so the power of two, the confidence that you're on the right track too. You're not seeing something more into it, or the encouragement of somebody to do the right thing.
Yeah, and even in Dixon, your moral hero, Kath Swanson, after she sat on her information for a couple of days to try to figure out what her duties were, and she realized that she had to speak up about this embezzlement, and that she couldn't live with herself if she didn't. Her next step was to consult with the mayor, who she trusted, and to try and get some advice. And the mayor actually said, "Well, let's go outside of town and get law enforcement that we know," because at that time they didn't know who else in town was kind of affected by this or involved in it. Turned out nobody was much, but I thought it was a smart move for the mayor, very strategic, and also it kind of helped, I think, Ms. Swanson to think, well, we're gonna turn this over to the FBI, which is of course a pretty exalted level of enforcement, but also the office was outside of town, so that there was an objective view on it. And the power of two really gives you the chance to get that kind of perspective and advice. And then it's not just your problem anymore. You're not crazy. You've got someone there at your side, and sometimes they'll actually be your ally, not just as a kind of a trusted advisor, but someone who will go with you and sit down and talk to the office bully with you. And they're a witness in the room that can give you confidence and even evidence that might be useful later. So the general job of owning an ethical problem or a moral conflict at work is to regain your confidence. People call it courage. I don't think much of the word courage myself. I think really what's going on, I think everybody is courageous after they've acted well. And someone says, wow, that was really courageous. But to the person doing the action, it was fraught with anxiety and fear and risk. And they weren't thinking they were courageous at all. And I think what they might be is reasonably confident that they're doing the right thing. And I think it helps your confidence when you have company.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Just to our listeners, a quick little recap on it as we're talking about the city and the embezzlement by Rita Crunwell. Over a 20-year period, Rita Crunwell embezzled $54 million from the city of Dixon. I was part of a leadership team to help rebuild trust, confidence. I was the police chief at the time. And I know one of the things is I sat with Mayor Burke and he tapped me on the shoulder and asked, to help with leadership, was he was a man that wanted to be certain. And he's like, we believe that this is what's going on. It appears obvious this is what's going on, but let's get the experts who deal with this scope of a thing, because he was also a person that if he wasn't right, he didn't want to damage and destroy the reputation of another person. And I, for one, am grateful that it was handled the way it did, because I can't imagine the two of them and what they had to carry for 6 months as they're getting documents for the FBI and watching another $6 million walk out of the city. The good news is we recovered very well. We're, Dixon's on the move. We've rebuilt everything, changed form of governments, recovered the majority of our money. But it's awesome to see you highlight Kathy.
Yeah.
And to talk about, her confidence and later now referred to as courage. You're right. The power of two and what that was to come forward and to do the right thing. But it doesn't have to be this big of a situation. No. There's a lot. If we're sitting across from a team member that maybe isn't making the grade, and you're trying to figure out how to have this conversation because you want to do it in the most positive way, you don't want somebody mad on you, having an ally that you can talk to at the appropriate level to help you work through that, to make sure we're seeing things the right way, to look at different approaches, and ultimately, like you said, to build the confidence to have the conversation. That's a big deal.
Yeah, and I think you made a really good point. It doesn't have to be a big ethical conflict where someone's doing something wrong. I think to be a responsible leader, you really have 3 things you have to be proactive about. You're the one who wants to do things right. and you're the one who wants to do the right thing, and then you're the one who wants to model what being the right kind of person is. And you bring that every day, what happens is, by insisting on doing things right, you actually eliminate the problem of doing the right thing, because by doing things right, things don't fester and get distorted where it becomes an ethical problem. You're actually following the protocols, or you're following the procedures that you're supposed to do to make sure that it gets done right, that the quality is high, that the product is got integrity. And it's only when people start forgetting about doing things right that suddenly it becomes a problem of doing the right thing to blow the whistle on them. So I think responsible leadership, which is sort of the big topic that I think the conscience code is about, really begins with just having standards and being the one who owns those standards as a value. And then you just project to people around you that a life, a professional life where these standards are front and center, is going to create a positive workplace. It's going to create high morale, and it's going to create great work products that people are proud of, because not only are the products excellent, but the way you got them has integrity.
That matters so much. Let's talk about this, leading with our values, values-based leadership. Rule 2, commit to your values. I've got some notes that I've taken.
Sure.
So what are the 5 values that are common themes to create integrity?
I think that, there's a lot of research on values, and of course, they go all over the place. They're, depending on your tradition, they could be religious values, they could be professional values. I think when you boil them all down to the ones that are essential, you come up with 5 that I made into an acronym. It's handy to remember things. And the acronym is CRAFT, CRAFT. And the first cluster of values are around compassion. And basically, those are values where you care about others' safety, about their well-being, about their suffering. And so if you're in an office and there's a summer intern who's being sexually harassed, you may see it as, oh, this is a bad person who's doing the harassing, and I need to correct them. But I think a more full emotional response is, this is a victim who's suffering, and it calls on my value of compassion to try to help relieve that suffering. And that's really the reason you're doing it.
Love to.
Yeah, so compassion has all that sort of concern for others, and that's the first one. Second, respect. And so there's kind of respect is more, goes to dignity and the value of each individual to be given their place at the table, for them to be heard, for them to be treated in a way that's fair, along with everyone else. And a lot of what's going on now in the workplace around social justice issues and a bunch of other things that can get very escalated very rapidly, they often start with people simply not being given the dignity that every individual is entitled to. And then the anger that comes from that ends up exploding into something that's much bigger than it had to be, because someone really didn't show respect when they could have easily shown respect. So the second is respect. The third is accountability, and we sort of talked about that. Accountability means people say they're going to do stuff. It's up to the leader and the value of doing things right to hold people accountable. Now, all you have to do is know about an office where people aren't being held accountable to realize what happens in a group of people when there's favoritism, or someone's getting cut a break because they're having an affair with the boss, or there's just all these different corrupt things that sit in. So even-handed accountability is a huge value, I think, that helps make everything else work well. And then the fourth one, CRAF, is fairness. And fairness is about justice. Fairness is equal pay for equal work. Fairness is we take turns working overtime. We don't just assign it to the person we don't like. Fairness is the kinds of processes we should engage in when someone is accused of wrongdoing, and we want to make sure that there's due process for them, that they give a chance to be heard. All the values around fairness are really important. And then the final letter in CRAFT is T, and that stands for truth. Truth is the kind of value that brings us to the law of fraud. When people are committing fraud, they're violating that. It brings us to all the different ways that people cheat, whether it's on expense accounts or on taxes or on hours that they've worked. A lot of my students come from consulting and finance before they come to Wharton as for their MBAs. And it is unbelievably pervasive. I mean, it is shockingly pervasive how they've been conditioned to cheat. Not because they're bad people, but because the cultures of these companies suggest that if you don't exaggerate your hours, or if you don't manipulate your expense account, you're a sucker. And everybody does it. And so you feel like you're not taking advantage if you don't put in for a meal that you didn't actually eat, or a taxi fare that you didn't actually take. And so one of the things I try to do is repair them and bring them to the realization that everybody does it is not a reason to violate your conscience and to violate your values. And going back to what we were talking about earlier, that's the slippery slope. As soon as you start down that pathway, the brain is an interesting organ. Synaptical pathways that you use often become habits, and you stop thinking about them. You just stop thinking. Now, on a positive level, that's wonderful. If you practice telling the truth and not lying, then it becomes easier to tell the truth than it was. But if you practice lying on your expense account, then it becomes easier to cheat on your taxes because you just stop thinking, and it becomes a habit. So I think all these, compassion to truth, are virtues. And I think the big thing that I try to do in the book and in my class is it's not really teach anybody to be any better than they already are, because almost everybody is already a good person. It's to remind them that to be a good person, you have to act like that. And they knew that when they were kids. Their parents taught them that. Their coaches taught them that. But it's funny how social pressure and conformity sets in when you're in the workplace, and you sort of take on like a chameleon, you take on the vices of the people you hang out with without even knowing it. So I'm just trying to provide a corrective.
And doing it. I love the way you brought this part. You made it simple. You make it actionable, very reflective. We can't teach people how to respond in every single situation. We talked about this before we began the show, but if we're guided by specific values, how we respond, never react, right? We never react, let other people control us. How we respond based in our values turns out to be a very good decision-making process. And it allows us to stay true to who we are. We can be trusted. David Horsacker says, the world-renowned trust expert, we can be trusted to do what we do consistently.
Yeah. And the word responsibility, as I'm sure you probably mentioned in a podcast before you talked to me, is the ability to respond.
Yeah.
And so every leader has to just make sure they remember that the essence of leadership is owning their responsibility.
No, 100%. Let's transition a little bit. I think you talked about this a little earlier. I don't know we named it this way, but rule 3 is know your enemy. And when I saw that before I read through the chapter, I thought about that too. In this, when I see the conscious code, lead with your values, what this is going to be about, like the person across from you or the person doing wrong, but know your enemy has to do with you. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, sure. No, I think, again, it goes back to this pressure, opportunity, rationalization. The enemy is within you. Now, if you're a religious person, there's a lot of metaphors that immediately conjures up of the evil one. And I think religion often has embodied these pressures that we feel inside by giving them this sort of, this sort of focal point. But social science and social psychology have really studied this in detail in the sort of current era. And I have another 5. I call them the pairs pressures, P-A-I-R-S. And the first pressure is peer pressure. And anyone who has a teenager knows what can happen to someone when they are surrounded by people who are tempting them to do the wrong thing. And it's the same way all the way through life. So peer pressure is the first pressure. And that's, it feels like it's coming from the inside, but what it is, it's your desire to fit in. It's your desire not to stand out. It's your desire to be part of the crowd. And humans are social creatures. So this is very, very functional, normal. It's why we have good teamwork is we create peer pressure toward the good, but it can also be exercised toward the bad. So the first is peer. The second is authority, P-A, and authority pressure is well researched that we tend to defer to authority. We tend to follow orders. We tend to do what our bosses want us to do. And it sort of organizes social society for there to be hierarchies and for people to not spend all their time questioning every order they get, but to simply comply. And so there's a lot of functionality there. But once again, when the bosses ask you to do something that you know to be wrong, that on the one side, you're going to feel this desire to comply and to be helpful and please the boss. And that's an inside pressure. And on the other, then you have your conscience and your values, and you have to be able to recognize this is a moment when you should push back against authority, question authority. So PA, and then I are incentives. These are the things that the group will buy into that are goals or financial pressures or reporting pressures, the kinds of things, if you work on Wall Street, there's always the pressure of the street, the incentives of having your stock price be a certain level. And these are incredibly powerful. It's the engine that makes us work in some ways, are the incentives, the pay we get and the pride we have for gaining status by getting promotions. So those again can be very functional, but then they can draw you in the wrong direction when the incentives are, basically tempting you to cut corners and get there the wrong way. Then R are the roles that you're in, and I think sometimes, I don't know about you, I have 2 boys, they're now grown men actually, but one of the things that happened to me when my first child was born, I woke up one morning and I went, oh my gosh, I'm a father, and that was a whole new social role for me. And the next thing that came into my mind were, well, what are my responsibilities now? And for the first time in my life, I understood the role my father had played in my life and the way he thought about his responsibilities. And actually, the first Father's Day after I became a father, I wrote him a long letter and tried to explain how I understood what was going on. So the social role you occupy carries expectations, and that can be, again, it can be very good because you have a model of what a father should be or what a boss should be. But it could also be a problem because you think your role requires you to go along, to carry out the orders, to not speak up because you're too junior. And so you have to push back against your self-imposed limitations based on what you think your role is. And then finally, the S in pairs, P-A-I-R-S, is systems. And these are the largest pressures that we feel as humans. They come from organizations. They come from social understandings. Sexism is a problem that's a systemic problem. If you are trying to cross a border and you run into a customs official who wants a bribe, that's a systemic problem. And it's really hard to fix a values issue that's a systemic problem at the retail level. You're not going to fix global corruption by refusing to take a bribe or by making a big issue about a bribe at the Turkish border. You're gonna have to think of some bigger way to handle it or prepare for it as a systemic problem before you get there and have a solution. So the system ones are hard, and that's where you get to major corporate scandals. It's where you get where industries become corrupt and they are price fixing, for example, or you end up with systemic racism and people are, being systemically discriminated against because of bias. And these are system problems, so they require system solutions. And when you enter into the systems end of this, it's much more about organizing, forming coalitions, getting a group of people together that share values and trying to correct the system. That's hard work, but if you're a person of conscience, sometimes that's what you have to do. Employees at Google not too long ago were aware of the fact that a boss had gotten a $92 million payout as a retirement package, and he was a convicted sexual harasser. He had literally sexually assaulted another employee, and the internal system at Google had found that he had done it, and they still gave him this big bonus. And so the people at Google who objected to this didn't just go to their boss and say, this is wrong. They staged a global walkout all over the world on a given day at a given hour. So all the employees who felt the same way could make a statement that was a political statement about this, but it was a political statement to the company. And that's a system kind of response. And in fact, the company did respond, and they changed their policies, and they changed their governance procedures for sexual harassment claims, and they made a big difference.
Wow. Wow. So knowing your enemy, it's about the things we feel inside. They're pressures that we put
on ourselves.
One of the phrases it refers to me is fear of man, fear of others, and that social shame, or there's many more than that, but peers, authority, incentives, roles, systems. It really creates that fear. I know you talked about in the book, these things create fear, they create uncertainty, they destroy our confidence.
Yeah.
You talked about the importance of having that confidence.
Yeah. And I think the reason I titled the chapter Know Your Enemy is that if you don't have a word to describe what you're feeling, it feels much more powerful than if you say, I know what that is. That's peer pressure. And here's some things I know I can do that will help me step up against it. And one of the first things you can do is find a friend. The power of two is your best defense against peer pressure. It's also your best defense against all five of them, because we are creatures who perform better in teams. There's no doubt about it.
So for the purpose of this podcast, I want to step into one more thing here. And I think it's probably under the act of OODA, right? OODA, observe, own, decide, act. And that is choose to lead.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the book has a journey. And the first step in the journey is to face the conflict. That's rule number one. And the last step in the journey is choose to lead. And I think it's really important to begin thinking of yourself, even if you're a mid-level person, or even working on a factory floor, or you're a warehouse employee at Amazon, you can choose to lead from wherever you are if you follow yourself as a person of conscience and make your values the North Star that you're going to follow. And it's a funny thing about leadership is essentially modeling the behavior you wish you would see in others. And I think you can inspire others by speaking up. You can inspire others by taking action that they wish someone would take, and you've found the way to do it. And there's a wonderful theory of leadership that's been neglected that I try to resurrect in that chapter. It's called adaptive leadership. And adaptive leadership assumes that there are going to be conflicts of values in the workplace, and that one of the essential skills of an effective leader is conflict capability, that you're not afraid of conflict, that you're not going to dodge it. You're not going to look for it. You're not going to, try to seek it out and stir it up. But a great leader is someone who's got the skills and capabilities of managing conflict effectively and reconciling values in the workplace. Finding out what they are, putting them on the table, finding out how we can square the circle and take action that's consistent with what might look like conflicting values. But when you air them out and get people to express them, you often can find ways that that you can act with integrity and not basically remain aligned with values that on the surface look like they might be pointing in opposite directions, but you've figured out a way to make them reconcile.
That's pure gold. That's pure. I didn't have time to write down that exact quote, But when the podcast drops and people are listening to it, it's dropping the week of June the 8th. There'll be a post, all week on LinkedIn. We'll be posting around this conversation, this topic, taking deeper dives. And that will be a quote that leads a post. Very, very powerful. The job of leaders to, I think you said something along the lines of resolve conflict at values, and get that resolution. Really, essentially what it meant to me, to pull everybody back together. And wow.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'll give you, well, this could be a controversial example, and I don't want to polarize your audience, but one of my students brought a case study to class that I found. I actually ended up breaking them into teams to think about what they would do. And it was during the Black Lives Matter movement, sort of height of the anger and the discord that had come out of that. And some of the employees in the small company had wanted to wear their Black Lives Matter buttons to work. And there were also people who were supporters of Make America Great Again in the same office, and they wanted to wear their red hats that said MAGA on the hats. And so you had basically a cauldron of potential conflict over values, both sincerely held. And there they were, ready to explode. And the owner of the business had to figure out, if I say no to this group, then this group is angry. If I say yes to this group, then the other group's going to be angry. And there's just no way to reconcile this. So they actually, this guy was an adaptive leader, and he actually pulled his employees together, and he said, whatever our differences are politically, we all want this company to thrive, and we all want our customers to be served. And can we agree on that? So he found common ground below the level of their values on the political front, and tried to get back to what they were doing there in this little community. And so after some discussion, they all agreed that that's actually what they wanted to do. They didn't want to blow up the business. And so they finally agreed that people could do whatever they wanted to and wear whatever they wanted to wear in the back office, but that they wouldn't wear any of their gear when they were customer facing. And not cause unnecessary disruption with whatever their customers' beliefs might be. And I thought that was a really good example of adaptive leadership. There was a conflict. It could have gone explosive. But I think the more in the current environment, all of us are able to exercise that kind of adaptive leadership and get people to just work together to solve a common problem instead of focus on all our differences and go to the barricades every time someone says something you don't agree with. I think that's the way forward as far as I can see.
That sounds like just incredible leadership to me. Good way to bring things to a close. I always like to ask guests, is there any call to action you want to issue to those listening to the podcast?
It's very simple. I would say, think of yourself as a person of conscience at work. You probably already do as a person of conscience at home. Just bring that to work. And I think let your conscience be a lively part of the way you conduct yourself. And I think that you'll find that people respect you more, that you'll have more self-respect, you'll feel better about your work, and you'll have a much more positive and thriving workplace.
Awesome. Excellent call to action. So to our listeners, in the details of the podcast description, there'll be a direct link to Richard's book. If you want to purchase that, go out, purchase the book. There's so much more. There's no way we could have gone through all these 10 rules and the stories, the research, the way you bring this to life, and in a 55 minute podcast. But if people want to find you or want to connect with you, Richard, what's the best way to do that?
The simplest way is just go to my website, grichardshell.com. GRICHARDSHELL, grichardshell.com. And everything about me, about the books, where to get them, and then my links to my Wharton School faculty page and all that are all over the place. So, but that'll give them a quick hit on me and who I am.
We'll put those links in the details of the podcast description. And there's one thing that people don't know is that Richard is actually Adam Grant's mentor and taught him everything he knows.
No, not at all. He's certainly a colleague, but I think Adam taught me more than I taught him.
Well, I thought I'd throw a little joke in at the end. When you talk
Okay.
about, how prestigious, Wharton School is and the experts that they have within their faculty, training and teaching the best and the brightest, that I'd throw a little joke in there.
All right, fine. Adam and I are good friends. He and I taught together. Actually, Angela Duckworth is another member of our faculty, the author of Grit. She was a
Oh, yeah.
PhD student. She was a PhD student. I taught for an entire semester in a course I had. So I know her very well too. It's a wonderful intellectual community at Penn. All right, we welcome all of your listeners to join us on Coursera and on lots of different platforms. It's great.
Awesome. We'll put some of that stuff in there. So, Richard, thank you so much for taking your time and joining us today.
Danny, it's been a real pleasure. It's been wonderful to speak with you.
So, Richard and I have been talking about, concepts, ideas, strategies, rules to follow in his new book, The Conscious Code, Lead with Your Values, Advance Your Career. Kind of broke it down. I love the OODA Loop, right? To break it down, make it even a little simpler, 1, observe, 2, own, 3, decide, 4, act. The fact that you had got that and shifted a little bit from fighter pilots. If it's good enough for them, it's good enough for us, right? And then, we talk about committing to our values, being very value-based in our actions and in our decisions, the importance of values such as compassion, respect, accountability, fairness, and truth, knowing that we got to know our enemy. I love that concept about knowing your enemy, right? Peers, authority, roles, systems, incentives, and that tied into the other one we talked about the power of two. The power of two. And then the idea we've got to choose to lead. Choose to lead. And one of the things that I've had a value of for a long time, it's what put me square in the center of our rebuild from Rita Crunwell, is when all else fails, lead. Choose to lead, but all doesn't have to fail. Choose to lead from a place of values and conscious, and your call to action. Think of yourself as a person of conscious at work. Most people do that at home, but think of yourself as a person of conscious. So many incredible takeaways. We just scratched the surface of all of the valuable information. Just again, Richard, thank you.
Thank you very much.
To our listeners, thank you for joining us. If you like this episode, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss another episode. Consider giving us a rating or review so we can reach more people organically. And remember, always be committed to excellence.